keep submitting your work to places. And if you get rejected, it's part of the game, and it's only one person's opinion. You just always have to remember that it's one person who didn't like your work.
Welcome back, everybody, to Beyond the Palette. I've taken a little break this summer, but I'm back today and ready for more in-depth discussions with artists and other folks in the art world. And Beyond the Palette is now dropping once a month on all podcast platforms, so be sure to listen. This is Whitney Rosenson, your host, owner and president of Art Dimensions, Inc., and today I'll be talking with a fantastic photographer from the Art Dimensions roster, Sarah Hadley. Sarah creates amazing works of art, and she and I have only recently started collaborating, so I am very much looking forward to getting to know her and for you all too as well. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to chat with me today. I'm really looking forward to this interview, so let's dive in. Can you give us a brief snapshot of your journey to where you are today?
Well, as some of you may know or may not know, I grew up in a museum in Boston, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, where my father was the director, and we lived on the fourth floor of the museum for most of my childhood. So art has always been part of my life, and I was surrounded by incredible master artists, Rembrandt, Titian, as well as ancient artists, architecture, textiles, just an incredible amount of art. And my parents also took us to many, many museums. I can't say I went willingly as a child always, but I certainly enjoy them now. And so art was always part of my life, although I didn't really think about being an artist. I went to college and was an art history major, and then started taking classes in actually painting and watercolor. And we didn't have a photography department, but I interned for one summer at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston, and I just fell in love with photography then. And I had small cameras over my life, and I just started taking it more seriously. And I finally, after I graduated from college, I worked for a few years in museums, and then I went back to school in photography. And since then, I have just always been a photographer, and I've done a myriad of things with my photography, but always my own work as well.
Wow. Okay. So do you want to mention what school you went to for photography?
Sure. I went to the Corcoran College of Art, which actually doesn't exist anymore. It's part of George Washington University now, but it got taken up by George Washington. It was a great place.
Okay. Awesome. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the different series that you have?
My first sort of really complete series was called Lost Venice. And it was sort of a ethereal, mythic journey through the city of Venice, Italy, in which I shot on sort of foggy days and wintry nights, and sort of reimagined Venice the way it was when I lived there. I worked also as an intern at the Peggy Guggenheim collection in the late 80s. And when I was there in Venice in the winter, it was pretty quiet and pretty sleepy. And so I sort of wanted to do this series that reimagined Venice in that way, and also reimagined the sort of joy of getting lost in Venice. And it was also sort of an homage to my father, who loved Venice, and we went there many times together.
Okay, so you've got the Lost Venice series. I do want to ask you something about that, but tell us a couple more.
Okay, so I then my next real series is that I did was called Storylines. And that is sort of based on cinematic narratives that from black and white cinema, from European cinema, from neorealism, and the work of the 60s, black and white cinema. And it's very much about women and sort of their interior lives. And those were always composite images, so collaging images together, but making black and white photographs, as the final product. And then from there, I started actually working in collage and doing more with color and creating color collages. And my next series was called Untethered Histories, which was very much about sort of the messiness of love and love stories. And I tore images and put them together in unique ways. And since then, I've sort of done a hybrid of photographs and collage in my practice. And I'm working on a series called In Between Days that is really about sort of the COVID time when we were not allowed to travel and we couldn't go anywhere, and me going back into my past, going back into old letters and old photographs and using them along with contemporary images.
What is that series called, the one you're working on now?
It's called In Between Days.
I can't wait to see some of those.
Yeah, I think I haven't even sent them to you. And then I'm actually also, I've been working for a long time on a project about growing up at the Gardner. So I've done a lot of shooting there, and I've done a lot of archival research about Mrs. Gardner and just about the history of the museum. Because I was a child when I was there, and I was not paying as much attention as I probably should have to what was going on and, really about everything. So I've learned a great deal, and it's been really fascinating. And I'm hoping that will come together in the next year.
I'm sure it will. The Lost Venice project, or the Lost Venice series, you said they're sort of mysterious photographs. You take them on sort of cloudy or foggy days. Why does that interest you rather than, let's say, taking photographs of the architecture there? Why that sort of environment? Why does that interest you?
I think all of my work is really interested in kind of the otherworldly nature of photography, where pinhole photography really was my first love, and the Holga camera, which is like a plastic camera you can use, but it makes it sort of blurry around the edges and it makes life a little less precise. And I love that photography can kind of take you and transport you into another world where it's not exactly what we see. So I've never been, well, I was in the beginning a documentary photographer, and then I soon transformed into kind of making dreamy images that kind of were more reminiscent of our dreams and of sort of this otherworldly space. And Venice really is otherworldly to start with, and then when in the mist, it's even more so.
I've never been to Venice, so I definitely want to go even more now. You mentioned how cinema has been an influence in your work, and you mentioned this in an interview that I heard on your website, actually, and I want everyone to check out Sarah's website, by the way, which is www.sarahhadley.com, and it's Sarah with an H and then Hadley. You mentioned your love for Fellini, your love for Man Ray. How does that influence your work? Your love for those filmmakers?
Well, Man Ray, certainly the surrealists have had a huge influence on me because, as they said, I love sort of the surreal nature of photography, and Man Ray certainly pushed the boundaries. And Fellini, I just love the stories as well, and his use of black and white. And I also mentioned Agnes Varda, who is the only female New Wave cinema director, and her work was just extraordinary. She did actually do some documentaries later, but in the beginning she did very New Wave kind of work that was black and white, set in Paris, and very much about women and sort of women's issues and women, how women were in the world and how they were seen in the world and how they saw the world. So I was really influenced by that.
Okay.
I think my parents, my mom's British, and my parents, we spent a lot of time in Europe. And I think they took us to a lot of movies when I was young, and a lot of black and white cinema. And I just was kind of mesmerized by both the use of the light and the black and white, and also by the stories.
Fantastic. Thank you for explaining that. All right. What do you hope people will, I'm putting my fingers up like quotation marks. What do you hope people will get from your images or your creations?
I hope that they are inspired and that they find, I guess, wonder is the word I would use. I hope that they find them interesting and also deep and meaningful, and that they somehow resonate with the photograph, the beauty and as I said, this surreal nature of them.
So there's a photograph that I'm that I have in my mind right now, one of yours, it's a female laying on like a lawn, and you've taken the shot from the side, not from up above, but do you know which image I'm talking about?
Yes.
That image for me personally makes me want to go outside and lay down and just look up at the sky and, you know, dream, just daydream like all day. So that's what I get from from your images. Who or what influenced your photographs when you began your career, and what influences it now?
So when I first started out, I saw this show at the Institute of Contemporary Art, and it was called Boston Now. It was like photographs of, sort of contemporary photography. And there was a pinhole photograph in it. And I'd never seen a pinhole photograph, which I don't know if everybody listening knows what a pinhole photograph, but, if you just take a picture with like a simple box camera, kind of an old fashioned camera, but that you can do them now. As I said, the whole world becomes very dreamy and very blurry. But there's usually one pin or one part of it is very in focus. So you can sort of know what you're looking at, but then you're kind of in this dream world. And I just thought that was unbelievable. And I just didn't realize that photographs could have that much impact. So that was really influential. When I first started out, I sort of looked at Cartier-Bresson. I also love the work of Robert Frank, street photographers. I was really, mesmerized by them. But as I grew older and as I changed, my style changed a little bit, sort of more to be about female identity. I really love the work of Francesca Woodman. And there's a collage artist right now, Mickalene Thomas, who's also a painter and a collage artist whose work I really admire.
Thank you. How do we spell Mickalene's name?
It's Mickalene, Mickalene Thomas.
Sarah, what's your favorite aspect about being a photographer, and what's the hardest part about being a photographer?
My favorite aspect is that somebody once said this to me years ago, and it's such a funny thing. You are never bored. So I am always, whether I have a camera in my hand or not, I'm always looking at the light, and I'm always looking around at how things look and architecture. And I'm just constantly, you're constantly sort of enthralled by the world and how the light is shifting, especially in LA. Of course, we have light all the time, even in, foggy days, though, it's beautiful. So I'm kind of always looking for photographs, even if I'm not actually actively shooting. And the thing that's the hardest, I guess, as with all art, I guess the hardest part is editing and figuring out sort of a body of work and figuring out when it's done, or what, how to complete it, and also what to say about it, and all the stuff that goes sort of around the making of the art. That part I find more challenging. Yes.
So how do you deem a series to be done, or a body of work to be done or completed?
I have a hard time finding it. I almost always just leave my series open, but I guess when I no longer am making images for it, with Las Venice, I finished it because I made a book of it. So that was kind of the end of that, but I still go back to Venice and shoot here and there, but I don't really think of it as a project or think of adding to that project. With storylines, I'm almost done, I think, because I've kind of stopped shooting for it exactly. I mean, it's interesting. I've made some new images, and I'm not sure whether they're a whole new project or whether, so there's that sort of gray area. I'm still making images sort of in the same style, but I'm not sure that they relate absolutely to the older images. So I think that they might be a new thing that's coming to fruition.
Okay, what art do you show in your own home, or do you only have your work displayed?
I have a lot of work displayed, not just my own. Plenty of other people are up on my walls. I have a whole wall. My dining room wall is full of photographs. Some are friends, some are older photographs of people who I admire and I've been lucky enough to acquire. And my own work is a sort of a rotating of what's out to a show and what comes back. So my own work kind of is constantly circulating in and out of our house. And my family seems to accept this as part of living with an artist.
What shows are you involved in presently?
I have 2 shows this summer. I am showing at the Photo Biennial in Louisville at the University of Louisville, and I have 4 images in the from my In Between Days series that are just going to be there starting in 2 weeks. So it's going to open in 2 weeks. I'm also part of a group called Memory is a Verb, and we have had a few shows, and our next show is going to be in St. Louis starting at the end of the month as well. And then it's going to move to the Brand Library in Los Angeles in December. It will be opening, I think, the first or second week of December at the Brand Library in Glendale. So yeah.
And how many pieces will you have in that show?
I'm not sure yet, but it'll be, at least 4, 5, 6. I'm not sure. I'm meeting with the curator actually next week to decide on exactly what's going to go in.
Oh, exciting. And it's called Memory is a Verb.
Called Memory is a Verb. Yeah.
Okay. So everyone who's listening, please check out the Brand Library in Glendale to see this show, which is opening in December.
Mm-hmm.
What is the first creative project that you remember for yourself that you worked on?
So does writing count? Because I was actually I wrote stories for most of my childhood, and I thought I was actually going to be a writer. And so I wrote many, many stories, and I wrote poetry starting in like 3rd or 4th grade. And I probably stopped sometime in my 20s writing stories, but I still write sort of films in my head. I have scripts and ideas, but I've never actually created them. But yeah, that was probably the first creative project that I finished was I wrote some stories and I had them actually published. I think when I was in 9th or 10th grade, I was published in a magazine.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing. I wrote a little bit in 3rd grade. I wrote poetry. So I know about that.
I love poetry to this day. I still love poetry. So yeah. And I find it really influences my artistic. If I read a really great poem, I think, oh, that would just make such a beautiful photograph, or I can imagine sort of illustrating that.
Mm. So you didn't always feel that being a photographer was what you wanted to do. I mean, you started with writing, then you gravitated towards photography. Did you ever experiment with any other media like sculpture or?
Yeah, so I actually painted in college, and I didn't start taking oil painting till my senior year, and I loved it, and I was enthralled, and I started painting a lot. And then just because of lack of a studio, I didn't paint again for about 30 years, but I now have a big studio and I actually do paint again now. So yeah, I went from writing to painting and then ended up as a photographer. So, but I now, as I said, I do all of them, but I just don't show them all.
Yeah, I was going to say I haven't seen the paintings.
No, I might show them to you someday.
Oh, good. I hope so. Do you think creativity is something you're born with or something you're taught?
I definitely think everybody is creative. I think that everybody has creativity in them. So I don't think it's necessarily taught. I do think that certain environments and teachers help to bring it out in kids. I went to an exceptionally artistic school, which I'm so grateful for now, where, as I said, we wrote poetry, we wrote stories, we actually had a kiln, and we did pottery, and we painted, and we did all sorts of stuff. And because of that, I sort of felt free to do it later in life. And I don't know if I'd gone to a school that didn't have art really as part of the curriculum and valued it as part of the curriculum. Of course, my parents talked about art, and we looked at a lot of art, but in terms of like creativity, yeah, I think that everybody has some creativity in them. I think they just need to figure out where they want, an interior designer is creative. I think lots of professions, fashion designers are creative. I think it just depends on your medium.
I mean, growing up in the Gardner Museum, certainly creativity sparks fly, right? I mean, you're surrounded by these incredible works of art. I heard in this interview that you gave that your yard was the garden that had like sarcophaguses in it and sculpture. And I mean, for me as a child and being, your imagination runs wild, and then you've got all of that to sort of play with in your mind is just great for creativity. Any advice for emerging artists who might be listening to this podcast?
Keep going, keep submitting your work to places, and if you get rejected, it's part of the game, and it's only one person's opinion. You just always have to remember that it's one person who didn't like your work. But keep going and find other artists to talk to and show work to and find safe spaces and mentors. I think that that's really, really important. But the most important thing is just keep going, keep making work, because every piece and every project informs the next one.
Okay. And the community is so important, right?
Community is so important. So yeah, I really struggled for a long time. I lived in Chicago and I didn't have a community. And then I finally found one, and it was terrific, because I think you definitely need a community of people who are telling you about what are the exhibitions to apply to, or what are the places or the galleries that are, open to showing emerging work. And also just go see a lot of art. I mean, that's a great teacher as well.
Yep, I agree with that. All right, Sarah, thank you so much for guesting on Beyond the Palette today. Everybody, please take a look at our websites, sarahhadley.com, Sarah with an H and then Hadley, and artdimensionsonline.com for more info and to see her beautiful photographs. Our Instagram handles are at Sarah Hadley Studio and at Art Dimensions, if you'd like to follow us there. And Sarah's website, once again, sarahhadley.com.
Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure. And I want to mention that this is going to be a blog post on the Art Dimensions website. So I will, if it's okay with Sarah, I will post a couple images of maybe not the series. I don't know, the series that you're working on now. Can I post a couple of
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Okay, that's great. So In Between Days, is that what it's called?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's called In Between Days.
Okay, so the blog post will be up. And thank you to everyone for tuning in to Beyond the Palette today. I hope you are all as inspired by Sarah as I am. I hope you all have a fabulous month, and I wish you all happy creating.